Researcher and author Judy Brownell proposes that there are 6 interrelated behaviors that enable people to be effective listeners. This is called the HURRIER approach: hearing, understanding, remembering, interpreting, evaluating, and responding. This video examines the role of interpreting in the process of listening. Of all of the listening behaviors described by Brownell, interpreting is the most complex because the listening behavior of interpreting is impacted by motivation, empathy, and the ability to understand correctly the meaning of others that they are trying to communicate through nonverbal messages. Let's examine the role these 3 skills have on being able to interpret the messages we're hearing. The first area to examine in discussing interpreting is motivation. In evaluating how effective you are at listening, it's valuable to ask if you are really wanting to understand others. Now, as harsh as that statement sounds, the reality is that it's possible to approach listening from the standpoint of, if others want me to understand them, it's their responsibility to express themselves clearly. We might be frustrated that our partner or friend seems to talk in circles and never gets to the point, and so it becomes easy to lay the blame on the other person. If we want to get to the level of being effective listeners, we must focus on being personally motivated to try to interpret or figure out what the other person is trying to communicate. How do you measure motivation? It is a growing level of maturity and responsibility combined with a real desire to communicate well with others. The second area to examine in discussing interpreting is empathy. Empathy is the desire and ability to see and attempt to follow how someone else is thinking, feeling, or what they might be trying to communicate. Empathy is necessary to interpreting messages from others in the listening process simply because other people do not always communicate clearly. We falsely expect people to say things to us that are exactly the way that we would say them. We would all love it if people just came out and said exactly what they mean, literally, but they don't. This means that you and I, if we're going to be effective listeners, must learn to put ourselves in the other person's shoes and figure out what they're really saying. Empathy is being able to listen to the other person's words and then attempt to view the situation from that person's perspective. We become so caught up in listening to the words people say when we should be trying to listen to how they are feeling or trying to figure out how they are viewing the situation. We're listening to the wrong things. For example, our partner tells us that we're following too closely to the person in front of us on the highway. We get defensive because we focus on the literal and we view it as an attack. Viewed through the lens of empathy, we put ourselves in their shoes and realize they have a much higher anxiety level than we do. This focuses on the relationship, not the words. Before I discuss the third area, let me give you the final exam question. What are the 3 types of empathy discussed in our text? The third area to examine in discussing interpreting is nonverbal messages. Nonverbal messages can either complement a verbal message, substitute for that verbal message, or contradict that message. A nonverbal message can be a facial expression, eye contact or the lack of it, nervous twitches, nodding, and body movement, as well as a long list of other things. People are constantly sending out nonverbal messages in the middle of conversations. If we're only focusing on the literal words and their literal meanings, we're missing out on important messages. We might be visiting with a person and we notice they are nodding in agreement and interest as we talk. But we also notice that they appear somewhat anxious or nervous and can't keep the rest of their body quiet. We should be trying to interpret whether or not they are sending contradictory nonverbal messages. As you can see, the task of interpreting messages is a complex and challenging skill. It can be learned and improved upon, but it begins with motivation. How motivated are you to really understanding the messages others are attempting to create? See you in the next video.